Welcome back to the shop. And yes, we are finally back in the shop. And enough fooling around with the not being able to come down for the cold winters. And the winter is not going away quietly into that good night here. It's it's mid-March, and we just had 14 inches come down last week. It's melting, dripping, but it's warm enough to be down in the basement again. So we're going to finally get back to some real serious work down here. I've been putting together little videos for you as things come up. But it's time to get to part 2 of rebuilding the Bridgeport. And very soon thereafter, 3 and 4 and 5 and however number of parts it takes to get this machine back in order, because I need it and I miss it. I finally finished scraping my Kingway. Let me bring this over to you. I'm going to leave it here. If you can see the bluing pattern on here, it's not 20 points per inch, but I got to tell you why it appears that way. It's actually flatter than it should be were I making a machine way, because this is a reference surface and I really want it to be flat as glass. I mean, I want it strictly to transfer blue to a machine surface for spotting. So it doesn't need to withstand, you know, hold an oil film for motion over the next 60 years. I mean, it just needs to transfer blue. So it's actually very, very flat. The blue spotting that you see on there is a incredibly thin layer of blue that I put down on the surface plate. So to have that much blue on there, that's really flat. Now, back in, I think somewhere along part 1, I said to you that I was going to show you how I scrape it super flat by back pulling it and taking off all the high spots. I mean, actually getting it glass flat. I'm not going to do that for 2 reasons. One, this is very flat as it is. This is as a as a reference should be. I mean, it's flat enough. But I'm also not going to do that because when I did it to the bottom, I did run into a few problems where I got a little particle here and a little particle there, and I put a few scratches in it, and I just didn't like it. I don't know that it's necessary. If I don't like the way this is printing, when we get to the dovetails, I will pull scrape it with a straight edge, not a curved edge, but a straight ground edge, and I will flatten it out even more. Take all the high spots down. But right now it's flat enough as it is, so that's where that's going. Now we're going to do the saddle, and I'm going to take the advice of several people who said, do the saddle independently on a surface plate, get it scraped, get it where you want it, get the ways parallel, all of that, and then use that as the reference to scrape the top of the knee. Makes sense to me. So that's what we're going to do. Now, before I do that, I also need to make a correction. Maybe an apology is in order. My newfound friend, Reese, who I showed you all those planing videos in his shop where he planed all my parts. I had said that, you know, the parts should be true within a few thousandths, and in fact they're much truer than that. They should all be true within a half a thousandths total indicated run out. I also said that not the saddle, but the table was twisted. It wasn't actually twisted. It was just bent. It was just, warped and high spots and low spots. It wasn't so much twist. But anyway, it's all good now. And I thank Reese for straightening all that out. So we're going to get to all of that. We're going to start now. We're going to take the saddle. We're going to go put it on our 18 by 24 surface plate and do some measurements and proceed from there. We'll try to get this done quickly. There's a lot to do on this machine. So without any further ado, you've heard me babble long enough. Let's go to the metrology lab, also known as the kitchen, and see what this saddle looks like. Okay. Here's the saddle. This surface, this is upside down. This surface, these two surfaces, I should say, plus the dovetails, are the y-axis, which rides on top of the knee. This is the problem with the Bridgeport. This is, out of all of the way surfaces on the machine, this is the smallest. It's the smallest overall in area, or obviously the table slides left and right on this. So if the table is all the way off to one side or the other, you've got a tremendous amount of weight on one of these surfaces. You'll notice that this one is also narrower than that one. And you have almost a corresponding, if not greater, weight on the opposite dovetail, lifting up. I mean, all the weight's hanging over. So this is upside down. So this is the problem. Now this was planed. You can see some plane marks in here, some lines. And we're going to measure some of this now. I want to see a couple of things. I want to try to pick a datum. A datum being a reference to work from. One spot that I can call 0 and work from that to keep everything else in square or parallel relation to everything, all the other surfaces. So this is a rough machine surface. This is looks like it was fly cut from the factory. And most people say that this is a good surface to work from. If you can measure this surface and work from here back, you'll be in pretty good shape. However, my friend Reese, who did this planing, said he didn't use that surface. That was not his reference. He instead, and I can understand why, you want to remove the least amount of material available. So he did the metrology of this piece, looking at these planes and these planes. Let me flip this up. This is the surface that the table rides on. These two. Here we go. Table rides on these two. And he did the metrology between these planes and the Y plane, this being the X plane. And he looked at where the high spots and low spots were relative to those two planes and took material off in the most economical means possible. Which means he may not be parallel to this rough machine surface. So let's see where we're at. We're just gonna slide a gauge around a little bit and see what kind of measurements we get. So we have an interesting little gauge here that I'm going to be using. this gauge, it has on the bottom here, has an interesting little foot that it's an averaging foot. I've never. There we go. That's a good. That should be a pretty good shot. You see how it pivots? It's got three surfaces on it, and it's a nice little gauge. Reads in microns, so pretty accurate stuff. Well, I'm seeing on the order of 1,000th from one end to the other. Okay, so yeah, it's on the order of about 1,000th high on that end, and gauging it this way, it's we're talking 10 microns. All right, so now the big question: what's the other side look like? Let me get a reference position here. Wow. 20 microns. 10 microns. 0. Okay, so Reese, you did a hell of a job, man. Hell of a job. Okay, now in comparison, that's the X and the Y. Comparing the X to the Y. Just for the heck of it, let's see what the factory reference looks like. I'm sitting over one foot of my plate. By the way, if you're interested in surface plates and you know how they're set up for reference, and you know the airy points and mounting and all the thermal issues involved, Robin Renzetti and Suburban Tool and Tom Lipton has a thing on surface where actually you can see his surface plates getting refinished. Some very interesting stuff. Robin Renzetti right now is restoring a surface plate that I guess has been used and abused, but someone else's negligence is going to be his gain. So he's restoring a nice 3 by 4 foot surface plate. It's a monster. Okay, so relative to the yeah, the factory reference is just it's all over the place. Way over 5,000ths from the center. Yeah, it's not even worth considering. Completely forget about it. The factory reference. Well, now the only reason that might concern me is because it's probably that reference is maybe what the lead screw nuts that mount in here are reference to. So we're probably going to take a little better look at that. So I'm seeing 0.02 difference from one, from you know, in line with these mounting holes to these mounting holes. And if I go from this side, if I go from this side over to this side, yeah, that's huge. So it's 2.5. So it's 0.02 this way and 2.5 this way. So there's definitely a tilt in this reference plane, in terms of how these lead screws are going to bolt into. But 2.5 thousandths, I can easily take that up with some brass shims. It's not an issue. I figure out which way we got to go with that. Like I said, the bigger issue is going to be how much higher or lower overall is this relative to that, where that axis needs to be. Alright, so we've got a pretty good idea that we're quite parallel between top and bottom, left to right. We've got good planar agreement. We can start scraping and bluing this, I think. I'm not actually in my shop. This is the kitchen where I do the metrology, so to speak. Such as the home shop. So we're gonna scrape here on top of our freezer. For those of you who have been watching my other videos, this is the same freezer upon which we made our panettone. So, but we do not do candy making on the granite tabletop. We have a piece of marble upstairs for that. Okay, too many hobbies. So we're going to scrape right here. I got my biax scraper. We're going to do a rough scraping. We're just going to scrape everything. We're going to take it all down, you know, 20, 30 microns, whatever it is, you know, that initial rough scraping, get the entire surface scraped. We will actually see high spots and low spots as we scrape, because there'll be that much difference that the scraper will highlight them. It's probably going to take a couple of passes before the entire surface is scraped down to where it's entirely a scraped surface, whether it's flat or not. I do feel a little burr on the edges, but we'll take care of that too. So I'm going to get my my stones and my Windex and my bag of rags and all of that. But first, we're going to take a print. There's no need to do this, to take an initial, to do an initial bluing on this piece. But there's no harm in doing that, and I think there's something to be learned there. We will see what a planed surface looks like in terms of high spots. So it's going to be a very heavy blue. I'm going to put quite a bit of blue down on the stone, and we'll see what that looks like. So let me bring you over to the stone, and we'll proceed to blue that up. I did have a rubber roller. I probably have it out here somewhere, that I used to use back in the old days for squeezing the water out of photo prints when putting them on a dryer, a heated dryer. And in the old days, when glossy photos used to be done on a chrome plate, a heated chrome plate called ferrotyping. And that hard rubber roller actually didn't lay down as nice and even coat as this. This is a fairly heavy coat. This, I know you can see the stone through it, but believe me, this is a lot heavier than I normally use when I'm getting to the end of scraping something. And keep this clean, I put it back in my box. I have a little box here that's just dedicated to print materials: red, blue, yellow, a couple of different rollers, some spreaders, some scrapers, variety of things. Okay. I neglected. Gee, I don't know that I did that right. My oil lines are going to be in my way here, I think. I screwed up, folks. We're not going this way because I got oil lines that I don't want to pull out. So instead, yeah, that should work. Whoops. Got plenty of it. We're going to go the other way so I can let the oil lines hang off the edge of the... Okie dokie. Whoop. That was the keeper. Good. That's the lock pin for the is that the X? No, actually it's probably the Y axis. Okay. So don't need that in there. So let's move this around a little bit. Let's see. Do I pivot at my 2/3 point? I doubt it. No, actually, that's interesting. It pivots there. And if I go the other way, that pivots almost near the middle of this surface here. Okay. So let's flip it back over. I think you'll find this very interesting. I find it interesting already. I'm just going to show you one part here. I have contact from one side to the other and from one end to the other. I have one narrow band along the edge here without any blue. Have a little spot over here without any blue. So really, that's amazing. That is that really is a testament to the quality of the planing job that Reese did on these parts. I don't know if he blued them. I doubt it. He probably just gauged them. But that's outstanding. That really is outstanding. That is a very flat, true surface. Now you can see the lines. You can see the tool lines. But they all lie within a plane. I'm very pleased with that. We're going to start scraping. I'm going to get right to it. Here we go. Now, Let me just show you this. I zoom out again. This is the heavy-duty biax scraper. I had trouble even finding this one. They're not easy to come by, and they're not cheap. So this is I guess the EL. This is the heavy one, and trust me, it is heavy. So I have added a shoulder strap that I can bring this right up under my shoulder, get my hand in the foregrip, and I can hold most of the weight with my shoulder as I scrape, because my right arm was getting pretty tired, or whichever. Sometimes I do it on the left, but anyway, I thought that was a good idea, and it seems to work. So we're going to get right to scraping here. We got plenty of sunlight coming in, and sometimes I scrape forward, sometimes I scrape backwards. In this case, I'm going to scrape backwards, and this is rough scraping. Long strokes, fair amount of speed. Okay, let's clean that up here. And little Windex and our India stone, which is also pretty clean. We just used it earlier. Feels very nice. They don't feel any high spots. I'm sure there's a few. I'm just going to run this over the edges a little bit, just to, I did feel a little sharp edge from the planing, actually. Okay, clean my stone. I'm not going to print this until I do the other side. Give you an idea what it looks like. I'm not quite sure what happened to the audio here. I guess the battery in my remote mic ran out. But what you see is the tool marks from the planing coming through where I've scraped. You can see the scrape. I did scrape both ways on this, so you do get a little bit of that checkerboard. But you can clearly see the planing, the tool marks coming through. And if we back away, where it's blued, that's much more clear that every quarter inch or so, there's like a renewed surface in the planing, and who knows how the tool sits. Let me shoot it this way. We've completed one pass. All right, this is the side I showed you earlier before it was blued, and you can see on the inside, the top of the screen, that I've probably taken off a little more, or more likely I've taken off a little less on this lower edge. But you can see some of the scraping points in there. Now if we look at the other side, this is interesting. You can clearly see the lines the many parallel lines in the planing. I'm not quite sure why that occurs. I noticed the same thing on my straight edge, that it would go about 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch, and then it would dig in, and I'd get a deeper line. But it's very consistent, which is fine. So that was just the first scraping. That was a fairly light scraping. So I've got a way to go. I want those lines to go away. When I can't see those lines anymore, then I move into more finish scraping. So I'm going to sharpen my tool, probably lengthen my stroke on the machine a little bit. Got to watch out for those oil grooves. And I'm going to try to do a couple of side-by-side comparisons as we go along. Okay, so there you go, first pass. Welcome back to the shop. We're back continuing on the saddle, which would be part 2. A few changes since the last shooting in here. We got ourselves one of these Harbor Freight welding tables to work on. My family was getting a little tired of lifting 200-pound chunk of steel in order to get a loaf of bread out of the freezer. So we decided I needed a welding table anyway. And I gotta say, it's not a bad purchase for $69 or so. So even though these are roughing passes, as Richard King will tell his students, individual strokes. And with the lower speed, I am able to achieve that to some degree. Now let's see if I get the angled light on here. And there we go. Almost had it. And you can see I've got some crisscrossing pattern here. And you can change the angle of attack. You can feel how the blade catches and digs in, and when you see it start to smooth out, when you see the one pattern begin to obliterate but not completely eliminate the previous pattern, you know you're getting a pretty flat surface. So we're going to stone that. I'm going to Both the sound and the feel will tell you how your cutting edges are. I'm feeling very little burrs. And I do tend to overstone. Certainly at this stage, I do tend to overstone. Because I find that if you have a good stone, this is not a particularly good stone, but if your stone is pretty flat and you apply even pressure, you will see high spots. The stone will reveal high spots. It's obviously not as good as printing, but you may save yourself a print. You may get a real obvious stone polished spot that you can just hit before you continue on to the print. So this is definitely being overstoned at this point. You do this enough and you end up with a surface ground. You have to start over because you don't have any pockets for oil. But that's at the end. Okie dokie. This doesn't get too bad. Every once in a while, you might see a few shiny spots in there. I can't tell at all in this. Oh, maybe you can see them there. You see a few bright shiny bits of metal in that stone. Every once in a while, if they get too plentiful or too big, I'll just go take a little hardened steel scratch awl and I'll pick some of them out. That's a little heavy, but that actually may be all right for the initial. We're still in the early stages of scraping, so a little heavy is not necessarily a bad thing. We'll be able to see some deeper valleys. If you print light at this stage and all you see are the very highest spots and that's all you scrape, you will be doing this forever. And we don't want to do this forever. It doesn't look too bad. This side looks nice. I got a lot of blue in here, spread from one end to the other. This side still has this side still looks like it's a little irregular. I got a lot of high spot around this oil channel. This the end up here. See, right along this end. And I don't know if that's my scraping or I guess it is my style of scraping. I'm a little leery of getting close to the ends. You always want to be scraping off the ends. Obviously you don't want to scrape into the ends, and sometimes I'm not at the right angle, so I tend to neglect those edges. This edge is also kind of high. So I must have been coming in from this angle and I neglected to get these two edges. So I'm going to scrape it the other way now. So get some of those spots. And this other side actually looks pretty good, I would say. Pretty good for this stage, not, but it looks like we're pretty much, you know, in plane, roughly in plane here. And you can see the spots that are the highest. Now, remember I said when we were stoning that there was going to be a couple of spots that were going to print up, and sure enough, there they are. 1, 2, 3. Those are the 3 polished spots. And I think I said there's some polish along the edge. So there's a couple of very high spots. And sure enough, they're not big because they are high. They are quite high. So the area around them is not getting any blue because those spots are higher. So we're going to hit those first, and depending on, let me hand hold this for a second. Okay, I want to do a little hand holding here just to give you, you'll see right along this edge, you see a light blue and then a darker blue on the inside. That lighter blue is the highest spot where the blue gets pressed thin. I saw a good video on YouTube. I'll link to. Same thing here. You see that light blue land in the middle of that peninsula there. So those are the highest spots. And here's the spots where I said would be very high. And you can see that little round one low just above my finger there has a bright center. So that's the high spot. That's what I saw when I polished. And obviously very high there, very high in the center of that. Okay. And this one we're still roughing, I think. So we're going to attack those edges and then some. We get a little area around them. So you can see where I'm being a little timid around my edges. I guess I would call this a transition point. You know, we've gotten the surface down to where we've gotten all the major issues resolved as far as scratches, gouges, lines, planing marks, whatever. And we're down to a surface that just really needs to be flattened and finished, and then we start scraping for points. Not quite at the scraping for points yet, but we're at. I think we're nearing the end of the roughing stage. I'm not going to go into this much detail on every surface I plane. I think this one is large enough and exemplary enough to do this on. And when we film the later stages, we'll just try to zip through them and get this machine together, because there's a lot more to this, putting this machine back together, than just scraping. But there's a lot of detail here too. Okay. Many weeks have passed since I last shot anything here. And we're just about done with this, the bottom of this saddle. So you can see the spotting. It's a little broad. It's even all the way across. I've got about 50% contact, and I may do some more scraping yet. This is a little bit finer, but it's everywhere I need contact for what I'm about to do next, which is use this as an indication of parallel on top of the knee. So we're going to take care of that. We're going to get that knee flattened out, and then we're going to start working on the dovetails and maybe do a little more finish scraping on this. But I'm going to use this plus the straight edge, so I'm not going to rely on this surface solely to judge the top of the knee. But you'll see that in a moment. Let's go out there and take a look at that. So here we are, looking at the knee. Now you'll see my little gauge here that I've made. This is let me see if I can flip this over. So you can see this is all scraped. So I know this is true. I just checked it on my surface plate. All right, we have a little gauge there. So this gives me a rough, maybe rougher than I'd like. This gives me a rough indication of what the depth of the wallow is from front to back. It's kind of hard to gauge that otherwise. So this works for that. I don't know if it was worth all the effort scraping this in, but it's kind of a nice thing to know. Anyway, I was very surprised to find that it was about 2.5 thousandths. Let me bring this down, and yep, here we're reading about 2.3. The other side's about 2.2, 2.3. So the wallow, or the low spot where it's worn here, is only 2.5 thousandths below these ends. Now, if we look really close, I hope this thing focuses closely. You'll see a little spotting out here. So obviously there's a high spot here, and I can attribute some of that to hammering because this has been beat on. It's got all kinds of hammer marks. I did go over this with a straight scraping blade, not a curved blade, not a normal scraping blade, but just a straight edged blade, just to take down all the high spots. And I went over it again with a file. I just sort of floated a nice file over it just to take down the high spots, kind of like stoning, but a little slightly more aggressive maybe. Not really to remove any metal except all these little dings, all these little hammer marks. I just wanted to get all the little crater edges down so everything was flat. So nice and smooth. Don't feel any high spots or bumps. I do feel some holes. There's a couple of holes. Like there's a real nice little score right there. I'm probably not going to do anything about it. I will get in there and pick at it just to make sure there's no grit in there or anything harder than cast iron. But and if we go to the back, you'll see the back looks almost factory. I mean, you can still see the half moon oil flaking, and same thing on the other side. Same thing on the other side. You get that half moon, beautiful half moon flaking, nice contact all the way from edge to under the dovetail for about 3 or 4 inches on both sides, which I was very pleased to see. And if I look very closely, I actually have a little contact. I have a little bit of blue right there. I don't know if you can see it. I got a little bit of blue there. I have another little spot of blue over here. So there's a couple of spots that at the same level as that. So this really shouldn't require a whole lot of material to be removed, which is not what I expected. Just looking at it, I didn't think it was too terrible, but 2.5 thousandths, I can live with that. I can really live with that. I'm afraid what I'm going to find is that there's going to be a lot of wear in the dovetails because it was really sloppy. I mean, the gib just slid all the way, like 2.5 inches in. So something's got a lot of wear, and if it's not the top of the knee, it's got to be in the dovetails. But we'll come to that later. Let's get the parallel surfaces done first. So I'm going to start this. I'm going to start flattening this out a little bit. I'm also going to drop the knee, and I'm going to compare the knee for squareness to the column, and that's going to be an interesting. That's going to be an interesting shoot as well. Also, you'll notice the there's a 24-inch Richard King, or Kingway, I should say. There's a 24-inch Kingway straight edge with the dovetail angle on it, which has all been finished and scraped now. It's all blued up. It's what I'm doing these impressions with, and I made a box for it. Very snug fitting box. Nothing fancy, just a box. Very utilitarian. So I'm gonna wrap up this part of the video series here. We're gonna call this the saddle, or the initial I guess the initial saddle scraping. We'll call this part 2, and then we're gonna move on, start shooting and scraping on the knee. So that'll be the next installment. Excuse me. Let me show you what we're going to use to check the squareness on the column. I think you'll find this interesting. Okay. What this is an Xcello squareness gauge, and it uses a very nicely made precision dovetail. I guess you call it a dovetail. It's a way. It's not really a dovetail, but it's got a sensitive indicator with little carbide balls, and there's a procedure for calibrating this. It's recently been calibrated, and it's quite accurate, and you're able to take a reference point with one ball and slide this up and down against hopefully a straight edge, and has a plastic handle, polished feet. Very nice little instrument. It's narrow enough that it will actually sit on the top of the knee, the base, and this is cool. It comes with its own calibration standard. So there's a ground and polished calibration standard. Let me take this camera down and give you a closer look. So, Xcello Right Angle Gauge. It's a casting. I assume it's cast iron. Very nice fine grain cast iron, no doubt. There's a little, this one, is that locked? It shouldn't be locked. No, that moves. So, little carbide ball. Nice little gauge. 10 thousandths indicator. And Another sliding dovetail here. And the reference gauge. Nice fitted case. I've got it on a t-shirt. Be careful not to scratch it. Yeah, I found this in a consignment store. And they were asking quite a bit of money for it. And it sat there and it sat there and it sat there, and the store decided that they were going to close up shop. And I guess they spoke to the items on consignment, and if the sellers were willing to lower their price, so be it. And a lot of the stuff left the store, but this remained. So I made an offer, and I got this for, I think I paid about $250 for this, and I was very glad to get it. So that's what we're going to be using to check the squareness of the top of the knee to the column. So what, if anything, am I going to do if I find that the knee is tipped forward? Am I going to pull the knee off and scrape the column? Well, depends. If it appears that the column is indeed wallowed out and it has a lot of slop in it, a lot of wear on the column, then I'll have no choice but to take the machine apart, lay the column down, and flatten the face of the column, which is not something I want and certainly don't look forward to doing. But I don't think that's the case. As I said, just an examination of the examination of the top of the knee indicated that it really wasn't that worn. And now that we've actually gauged it, we find out, well, I was correct. It's not that worn. So I don't think I need to do that. I really don't see flattening the face of the column in my future. So what do? If I find that there's wear on the front of the knee, I will lower the back of the knee. Simple as that. I will scrape away what needs to be scraped away to bring the front of the knee up to, or the back of the knee down to, where the front of the knee is. That's the plan. Okay, so that's it for this part of scraping on the saddle. It's probably too long already. And the next part will be scraping on the knee. And at least I won't have to be lifting the saddle up and putting it on the surface plate. I'll be applying, well, actually I will be lifting this saddle, because at some point I will be using the saddle as my surface plate, but I will also be using the Kingway straight edge, and probably some indicators and other things along the way. I like to make measurements in different ways. I like to do not just take the same measurements with different instruments, but actually different methods of measurement, different, take references from different places, use different types of instrumentation, and compare them one against another. And if somebody's out of whack, somebody doesn't agree, then I need to know why. And frequently I will find that there is either an error in my measurement methodology, or a problem with one of my measurement tools or gauges. So yes, measure things different ways, with different instruments, different methods. The method is important. Using a different method is important. taking the same reading with a different instrument is usually confirms one's error as not being an error. But there you go. Well, thanks for watching.